go. And once again, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Los Angeles Birders webinar for June 13th. Thank you very much if you are a member, and your membership helps support Los Angeles Birders, helps support things like this webinar and our ability to store them. It helps support events that by local field ornithology, such as our Swainson's hawk count that we've recently done, our community science projects, and lots of other things besides paying bills and keeping the lights on. So thank you very much for your support. Next, please. And with that, I'd like to introduce Kimball Garrett, who will introduce our speaker for tonight. Kimball?
Sure, thank you, Ron. Anyway, I'm excited to introduce our speaker tonight, Katy Delaney. Before I go into a very brief bio, I just want to say that Katy has hosted recently a couple meetings with local ornithologists about the monitoring of birds that they're doing in the Santa Monica Mountains. And it became clear at those meetings how much potential there is for Los Angeles birders and birders in general, or skilled birders in general, in the LA Ventura area to help out with some of this monitoring. And I'm sure Katy's going to be touching on that tonight, not only her work, but the work that Linnea Hall at the Western Foundation of Vertebrate Zoology directs, which includes a lot of point counts in the Santa Monica Mountains. So I just thought it would be really good to have Katy speak to our group, and I'm delighted that she's agreed to do so. Anyway, Dr. Katy Semple Delaney was raised in San Diego, California, and she did her undergraduate work at the University of California at San Diego, earned her bachelor's degree, and then went on to UCLA to study ecology and evolutionary biology and earned her PhD there. Her dissertation work, which was supervised by the late Dr. Robert Wayne and conducted in collaboration with Charlie Collins of Long Beach, focused on the mating system, evolutionary history, and the population genetic structure of island scrub-jays. You know, that bird that you pay the island packers some money to go out to see for your life list. Anyway, she's done some exciting work there. Today, Katy is a wildlife ecologist for the National Park Service in the Santa Monica Mountains. She studies long-term trends and the population status of reptiles, amphibians, and birds. As part of that work, Katy directs the reintroduction of the federally threatened red-legged frog to the Santa Monica Mountains. So tonight she's going to talk about some of this bird monitoring. So please welcome Dr. Katy Delaney. Take it, Katy.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Kimball. Let's share my screen. All right.
You're all set.
All right, cool. Thanks, everyone. So yes, thank you, Kimball. That's a little bit of my background. I'm going to talk tonight about the bird monitoring project that we started a few years ago. And I just want to preface and just say that in the beginning here that all of these photos are uncredited and stolen off the internet. So I apologize if you see your own photo, but I appreciate them very much just to share with you. So I work at Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. We are a national park, but sort of a weird one. So this is a map of the park here, which you can see is the outline of the recreation area. There's plenty of private property and unprotected property, unprotected open space within the boundary. And so what we do is we study animal and plant populations in relationship to the habitat fragmentation that goes on within the Santa Monica Mountains. As you can imagine, that there's lots of pressures from developers and development throughout the area. So we really have been concentrating on monitoring. My group and Seth Riley, my supervisor, and his group has been really focused on monitoring wildlife populations in relation to things like urbanization, human disturbance, and things like that. So the park is really a mosaic of open space, which is in this dark green color, this open space that is protected land. The Park Service, the federal government, only owns about 15% of that land. So the rest of it is state parks and other various landholders. And I should say that you can see on this map the 101 and the 405 over there, the very right side of the map, and Griffith Park all the way at the end there. And so you can see, which is not actually part of our, goes to the boundary of Griffith Park, but you can see that we have some highly urbanized area in the east and then some more open space in the west. And we try to get monitor different populations of animals and plants all over the place. We also monitor outside of our boundary. So I'll show you later, I'll show you a Google Earth image that really shows that we do go outside of this boundary when we're studying plants and animals. But that's just a snapshot of our park. So we're the largest urban national park. So Golden Gate National Recreation Area says that they are, but they really, it's just because they own most of theirs. But we have, our boundary encompasses many more acres than they do. So we get in little arguments with them about that. But we really are the largest urban national park. We're adjacent to the second largest metropolitan area in the country, Los Angeles, and the park spans 2 counties, Los Angeles and Ventura counties. There have been 394 bird species recorded that we could potentially be seeing within the boundary of the national park and a little bit beyond in our ecological zones. We have birds that are residents, they're wintering, they're migration stopover, they're breeding. There are different listed and special species of special concern that use the park. And so the Santa Monica Mountains are really important for lots of different kinds of birds, whether they're resident or wintering or breeding and just stopping over. So just to mention a little bit about the other wildlife programs that we have, you all have probably heard about our mountain lion research, but we also study lots of other mammals, and I didn't even put on here some of the small mammals that we studied, but my day job mostly is to monitor reptiles and amphibians. And so we have stream breeding amphibians, and Kimball mentioned the California red-legged frog. And so we had this whole suite, we have this big wildlife program that there's 4 biologists, and 3 of them work on carnivore mammals, and I work on other stuff. But we didn't have any bird monitoring. And that was something that, since I had started at the park, my boss and I had wanted to remedy. And we had talked about it over and over again. We tried to write grants to get money going and things like that. And so that was a real priority for us to try to get something started and add a bird monitoring project to the other monitoring projects that we're doing. So why do we want to do that? So we wanted to provide, if you monitor birds in these long-term monitoring programs, whether it's a mountain lion, a bird, a snake, a lizard, it can provide information about that species, where it occurs. That's one of the most important things, where it occurs. And so then you can actually start identifying what pressures it has as far as outside influences. And it can help us as land managers manage those species, those populations better. So where the bird monitoring, one of the main things is where are these birds? Basically, where are they? Then we can take that data and we can add a little bit more data that we collect, which we do. And I'm going to go over that in a second. But we have data that gets collected, and we can use it to do things like species richness of sites, to look at biodiversity of avian biodiversity at different parts of the mountains or different parts of the area. And then we can look at trends in those species richness, or trends in occurrences and trends in these bird densities, because we also are getting density information and abundance information from this monitoring. And so over time, this analysis of monitoring informs conservation. So as the Park Service, National Park Service's whole mission is conservation. So that's our mission, and we're supposed to be conserving the lands that we manage in perpetuity for the future, for the enjoyment of the future. That's like the whole mission of the Park Service, which is a cool thing, and it's a great place to work because of that. So long-term monitoring is not easy, and things like governments should be doing it, because a university, a grad student's not going to be doing long-term monitoring. They're going to start a project and they're going to work for a few years and they're going to graduate. So governments are sort of there's governments and other agencies that can do this commitment of funding and consistent personnel and project management. That's who should be doing this long-term monitoring. So how how do we monitor? So I've known Dr. Linnea Hall for a long time. And I think we met when I started this job. But she is at the Western Foundation of Vertebrate Zoology in Camarillo. She's an expert in bird monitoring and long-term bird monitoring projects. So she's not a government, but she does long-term monitoring, and she also just informs other things like Channel Islands National Park, for example, how they would want to do their monitoring and their long-term monitoring. And so we started having some meetings and different sort of, it's a long story, but there's a sort of history there, and we sort of said, let's go and let's get let's pair with Dr. Hall and recruit people to come and help us with our monitoring. So it's really down to her organization and her commitment to us and monitoring in the Santa Monica Mountains. And so what she does is, among many things, but just a few things, is that she has recruited local birders who want to use their skills to contribute to the project. And so that's one of the things I'm hoping that you all will be interested in learning more about after this talk, because I'm going to just touch on it a bit. But so she helps to train. She, will assign areas to people. She teaches people how to do the surveys. There's some training, some fun trainings to do, just so that you know what you're doing when you're out there, and training for data entry. And then she also provides us with yearly and synthesis reports. So we get a lot from her. And so that's a great partnership that we have, and that we want to continue and maintain. And so that's like sort of one of those long-term relationships that we are trying to build. So how do we monitor? We use community scientists that volunteer to collect data. There's a few of us park staff that are able to do it, but there's really only a couple birders on staff. So one of them is me, and one of them is Mark Mendelson, who's also recently permanently on staff now. So what do? We do this method called point counts. So we are point counting 2 counts per station during the breeding season. Each count is at a predetermined place. You know where you're going. You have your GPS points. There's some moderate hiking and everything, and you go real early in the morning, and you stand at your station and count birds. And you do that for 10 minutes, and you do that by sight and sound. Sound is a huge part of it. So you definitely, if you're going to be one of these bird counters, you want to be very familiar with your calls and songs for birds, because a lot of times you're not even going to see the bird. You all know. So what we do is we identify every bird and estimate its distance from us in meters. We note things like sex, age, behavior, habitat, any disturbances that happen to us while we're doing the count, and that maybe had disturbed a bird nearby. We note that. So just taking a bunch of data for 10 minutes at each station. Each area has 5 to 11 stations, so there's some that have a lot of stations. Then through an analysis method, using that distance, we can get density of birds at each site. So just a quick overview of that. And I just have to show the boring data sheet. So you're taking a bunch of data, but you just have this whole list, and in 10 minutes, you'll fill up this sheet. If you have a busy place, you're just gonna fill up that sheet, and you're gonna say, oh, these are all the birds. This is how many I saw or heard, and you estimate the distance from each one. And it gets pretty exciting to quickly try to, when it's very loud and there's the morning song, morning chorus, and you're really recording all these data quickly. And so it's pretty fun. It's pretty exciting. So where do we do this monitoring? We do the monitoring, like I said, all throughout the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area in that boundary, but we also go beyond. So we, to make this really comparable to other monitoring projects and comparable to other monitoring projects around the world, we picked random sites. So we did this generalized random tessellation stratified framework. We picked 1,500 points all throughout the mountains. They were near trails and stuff, near or on trails on public property. And then we take that entire map of points, and we sort of just distilled it down using this framework to get to these areas. So we pick these sites to monitor, and then we establish the stations, so the actual GPS points that you're going to count. And those stations are 250 meters at least apart. So like I said, 5 to 11 per site. So this is the 1,500 points that we generated with the grits draw, and you can see they're all with there are a lot of them in the Santa Monica Mountains, but then they're also sort of up in the Simi Hills and off into the east. So this is our potential site, or the potential areas that can be monitored. We never even expected, this is not what we're expecting to monitor, but this is the pool of which we could choose from, which is great. So what we have right now is so I'm going to go over the 2022 data. So this has been monitored in 2022. There's 12 sites. So there are 12 sort of areas, and then there's 82 stations total, because each place has 5 to 11 stations. Mine is sort of up there by Hidden Hills, called it says BC New up there, and those are mine. There's 6 stations that I do every year, twice a year. So really, it's a pretty fun project where you go out twice in one spring, and that's it. And you're monitoring birds, and you collect data, and then you enter your data, and you're part of this cool monitoring project. So these are all done by mostly volunteer people. I think there's one other place where our park staff is doing a count, where Mark does his counts, and everybody else, and then Linnea also has staff that helps out. But these are people that have sort of they adopted these points, and she wants a commitment of these 3 years, I think is what it is, but we have people that are just doing it for the whole time. And I'll get to the sort of history of how many years we've been doing it in a second. But so in 2023, I just wanted to add that we added a couple new sites. We have a couple new counters in 2023, and I hope this is correct. There might be an extra site, I'm not sure, but we also are doing bird point counts around Liberty Canyon, and I'm doing those as well. And those are not random, but they're part of our bird counting protocol, and we do it exactly the same way. And what we're doing is we're monitoring birds around the new Liberty Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. So we're trying to do bird counts before and monitor birds around the new wildlife bridge. All right, so the results. We're in the 6th year of monitoring is 2022. So this is actually the 7th. So it's unbelievable to me that we've already done that many years, because it seems like such a new project. And then the vortex of the pandemic, got weird. So but we're in the 6th year of monitoring. And like I said, we have 12 sites and 82 point count stations that we've done. And then as of 2022, we've detected a total of 116 different species at all these different sites. So I just made this really quick little graph where we looked at the number of species that you could observe at each site. So those little pink blobs that I showed on the map, each one of these is represented by a point here. And you can see in the darker blue, the lower line is how many species we observed in 2022. And then the light blue line is how many species we've observed in the whole 6 years. So that's kind of interesting that they should follow along, basically, right? They're following along. So there's just certain years that you don't pick up some species and you do pick up other species, and that information is super valuable. So when we get that data compiled in the reports at the end of the year, we can really see where we're getting species that we're not seeing. So we'll find species that will say, oh, we used to see that really consistently, but now we don't. That will be interesting information. We haven't really gotten the data to crunch that that closely, but we do have. But that's why the importance of this monitoring long term is really important, because that's the kind of information that we're looking for. What bird species were there and now they're not there anymore? And is that consistent over time that they're not there anymore? That's like an alarm bell goes off. And then the other thing that's interesting is the more sites we have, and Linnea does write this into the reports, is that we'll find like some species are sort of blinking out. We don't find them at like 4 sites. 4 of the 12 sites that used to have them, they don't have them anymore, or they weren't there this year. And so then you kind of go, okay, that's something to watch for next year, because maybe in the last 2 years they weren't there. So it's a real it's a real detail. It's a very detailed way to look at this, how they are, where the species are, and how many there are, and how many individuals there are, but also just, are the species there? Are you detecting them there? Yeah, so just making that point. One of the other things that's really important to do is to monitor for the special status species. So this is the list from the 2022 season where, well, it's a list from the whole monitoring project. There's 20 total species from our special status list. And Linnea's put together the special status list based on that tiny little table in the corner. That's all the different, you know, state and federal and other watch lists and various species of special concern lists, as well as our endangered and threatened species that are on there. And we have detected all of these species. So there's 14 of them we detected in 2022. So that's pretty good. We're getting a lot of our special status species showing up in our surveys, maybe only in a couple of sites. Some of them, if you look at them, they don't look like they should be species of special concern to us, right? There's a lot of, there's several species on here that you would, like Allen's hummingbird, right? So Allen's hummingbird is something that you have in your yard. And maybe, and Nuttall's woodpecker, you know, you have that in your neighborhood. But in other parts, but parts of the state or other parts where the range of these birds are, they are sort of on a watch list or have been seen to decline. And so that is also great information that we are monitoring the birds to say, well, we have these really robust and healthy populations of these species because we detect them all over the place every time we go out and monitor these sites. So the ones, there's quite a few on here on this list also that you'll recognize as pretty rare, and that we don't have a ton of places in the area that we detect these species, and those are obviously ones to watch. So all of these species, these are our sort of like, these are the sort of ones, these federally listed, state listed. These are the ones that are sort of, we know are very rare in our area or very specific to certain habitat types that are sort of nearby, but maybe not using our park, or not that often, or not breeding anymore, but now wintering, but then they're not breeding. So some of these we don't really see. But I do want to highlight that we did detect least Bell's vireo in the park at one of the monitoring sites last year. And so I've been talking to the Fish and Wildlife Service guys, and they're sort of, the Bell's vireo is sort of showing up in some places in the mountains. And so we're actually having to be mindful of when we're doing stream surveys and things, because they're such a riparian bird, and listening for songs and things like that. And so that's kind of, that's an interesting, I didn't really know about Bell's vireo recovery. And so it seems like they think that there's these recovery efforts that have been going on in the Santa Clara River, for example, and these birds are sort of dispersing, and we're getting more leaf Bell's vireos. You know, I work on an endangered frog, California red-legged frogs. The whole point is to make more frogs. So it seems like we have more leaf Bell's vireos because of the, or they think it's more, we have more of these birds, and they're gonna sort of start spreading around, which is amazing and awesome. So I hope that continues, where we're detecting them in, you know, our surveys in the future. So just to wrap up this part, and I hope that there's just time for questions you all can ask me, anything at the end, but so the future directions is we want to recruit more people so that we can make more of that map pink. And so we have some areas. It was really great this year in 2023 to get those, you know, few new sites. And sort of, we had some people from UCLA who were like, oh, I want to do it. And but they wanted to be a little closer to LA. So we, you know, had a Topanga site, so that was going to be perfect for that person. So, so that's kind of great too, to have, this is what the park wants to do, but then you kind of match the, you know, Linnea was matching the right volunteer with the right site. So that's a great thing. And then we will also be looking at more trends and doing more of a trend analysis of the 7th year in 2023. So there's other things we want to do, but yeah, that's sort of the immediate future for the project. Yeah, I think I want to switch gears now. And we'll talk about island scrub-jays for a minute. So as Kimball said, you give your money, so you go get this bird on your life list. And I was I was starting to study island scrub-jays in 1999. So that's how long ago it was. So forgive some of my slides and my methods, but I'm going to talk about my dissertation research a bit. And then I also just wanted to say, and the reason I sort of brought this up with Frank, I believe, was just to say, does anyone want to, sort of think about island scrub-jays again, because we've updated this Birds of the World species account for island scrub-jays. So I had written this account with Robert Curry, a professor, when I was a grad student, and it came out, I think it was from like 2002 or something. And so so then now I'm the old person, and Rebecca Cheek, who was a grad student in Colorado, she and I collaborated, and she was like very instrumental in getting this updated, much more updated, because it was about a 20-year-old account. And you can imagine, in 20 years ago, there were still Western scrub-jays. So this needed to be updated, and so we just published it last year in the fall. So that was great. So there's a lot of great information here. And then I just wanted to also just make sure that you know that island scrub-jays are only found on Santa Cruz Island. Santa Cruz Island is totally protected, partially by the National Park Service, and so Channel Islands has some land dedicated to, they don't monitor necessarily the island scrub-jays specifically, but there are a bunch of groups, especially on the Nature Conservancy side of the island, which is about 60% of the island is protected by Nature Conservancy, and the Smithsonian, and there's several other groups of researchers that are really into this bird that were not at all around when I was doing this work. And Kimball mentioned Charlie Collins, and Charlie was extremely generous with me and let me go and band his birds and take blood and catch them and do a bunch of genetic work on them. So so I had several seasons out on Santa Cruz Island, which I absolutely loved. I'm not going to talk about all of my dissertation because it's just too much. And but I did want to sort of talk a little bit about some of the things that have been published. So like I said, they're only on Santa Cruz Island. It's a very old California coastal sage scrub, chaparral, pine forest, and then this oak scrub habitat. That's very typical behavior. That's like a Western, or I still call them Western. California scrub-jays are also standing on, you'll see them on bushes like that. That's just very typical behavior and place for them to be. And so this is sort of a quick overview of a couple of these things. I'm not going to talk about the morphological differences, really. I cut that out. But know that these birds are much bigger. So they're 30% bigger. They're disproportionately larger. Their bills are disproportionately larger. So they sort of blew up their bodies and they blew up their bills more than the California scrub-jays. And they're brighter blue. And so that's what I was getting interested in the very beginning, way back in 1999. I was interested in why they were brighter blue. Was there any sort of indication for sexual selection or, male to male competition or anything like that in the feather color? And so I spent a lot of time measuring feathers, which I'm not even going to talk about today. But but that is one of the things that got me interested in them. And then I was in Bob Wayne's lab, and for those of you who knew Bob Wayne, I was his first student that ever studied anything that wasn't a carnivore or a dog. Basically, he had a few students that were doing other mammals, but he was just like, "What, birds? You're doing what?" So he was encouraged me to join his lab at a time when I really needed a lab to join. So I will always be appreciative of him. And we recently lost him in December, way too young, and he was a brilliant mind, and also kind of, just a brilliant mind and a great editor. And so we wrote a couple of papers together, and it was great. So just to review a little bit about some of the genetic work that I did that helped to split that species. the Western scrub-jay into the other species. So this is like a very old slide. So this is something that I would have presented, you know, like in 2005 or something, or 2002 or 2003, where I was sort of getting done with my genetic work and was ready to present it in conferences and things. And so I had these 3 closely related species. So people knew island scrub-jays were different, and then Florida scrub-jays were different. And then we just had this big glob of scrub-jays that were Western scrub-jays. And there's a lot of morphological differences within that Western scrub-jay complex, and no one had done, or there hadn't been a lot of current genetic work done on that. And so I decided to do that in relation to the behavioral stuff and the feather stuff with the island. It just made sense to also study the Western scrub-jay. So hence the Western scrub-jay. I'll keep saying it a couple times, but I promise I'll correct myself. So island scrub-jays are super fun to work on. They are, you know, I hope they're not polarizing. I love them. I think they're great, but they do eat everything else they eat. They like literally hunt little songbirds. It's kind of sad, but they also are great, you know, amazing nest predators and things like that. So a lot of people don't like them, but I'm going to come at this with my love of this bird. They're very tame on Santa Cruz Island. So that's one of the characteristics that happens with island species is they're more relaxed around people, basically tameness. This is how we catch I caught a bunch of them, which was a stick and a string and a box. And yeah, it's a ridiculous way to catch them, but that is how you catch them. And I caught a ton of them like this, and you can see the color bands on their legs, and they are totally in love and addicted to peanuts. So that's what you bait them with. So my first paper with the genetic samples was simply California and Santa Cruz Island. And so I just wanted to look at, so what are the scrub-jays in California and Santa Cruz Island like? And I was really focused on Santa Cruz Island. So I just wanted to see how different were they. And so I used mitochondrial DNA sequencing, which is completely obsolete now. But at the time, no one had done that. There was some work done in the early 1990s, like late 80s, early 1990s, by a guy named Peterson, and he had done allozyme work, and he had shown that there were differences, like genetic differences between island and Western scrub-jays. And so allozymes at the time when he was working, that was like the best. And then when I started doing the mitochondrial DNA sequencing, that was the best and what you could do. Now it's pretty funny, but so we published a paper that had this tree in it, and this tree basically shows that there's a big difference. So it is the Western scrub-jay of the California lineage, and the island scrub-jays are very different. And you can just see the tree that bifurcates there. And so we published that. And then what I wanted to do was take all of the samples from the entire range. And so I did the same sequencing, and I did the entire species range. And on this tree, you can see that there's island scrub-jays, and then there's that sort of upper part that is the California branch of the scrub-jays and of the Western scrub-jays. And that's very well supported as a very different thing than those Woodhouse's scrub-jays or the Woodhouse group. So at the time, I wrote this paper in 2008, and we published it and made this pretty figure showing the genetic differences as colors as the blue kind of fades down into that Sumichraste group down south in Mexico. And we could talk about them. They're really, really interesting. They actually have cooperative breeding, which is very different. None of these other Western scrub-jay complex, including the island scrub-jays, has that cooperative breeding. So they're super interesting. But so at the time, I proposed in this paper that they should be separate species. Sorry if you're not a splitter. So I did propose that, but then I was already done with school, and I was starting my job, I was starting to move on and things like that. And so I kind of went away from the scrub-jay world. And but I always kind of thought, like, if they're gonna split them, they should at least do the California and the Woodhouse's group. So one of the things that came, but one of the more interesting things that came out of that work, rather than just splitting the species, so I didn't go around advocating for that, but it was in that paper. One of the things that is the most interesting thing to me is that what that data showed, you can sort of apply a mutational molecular clock to that mitochondrial DNA marker that I used. And it really showed that, you know, it's a huge difference between those island scrub jays and that California lineage, an even bigger difference between the other ones. But if you just look at the difference between them with this marker, it really showed over and over again, comparing it with other species and everything, that we're looking at like a lineage of 120,000 years ago or longer. And no one thought that. So Charlie was like, no, they got here like 10,000 years ago when the sea levels were low and they just flew across. And he was just like, no, it's like the island foxes, 10,000 years ago, everything 10,000 years ago. So when I got this result, lots of people didn't believe it, which is fine because it's just one marker, it's just one thing. But I also argued that the lineage is really old. And what that means is that if it's been on Santa Cruz Island for 120,000 years, the sea levels were low during the last ice age, you know, 20 to 10,000 years ago. And so that whole island is outlined there in blue. It was a big island. It was one big island. So San Miguel, Rosa, Santa Cruz, and Anacapa was an island called Santa Rosa. So if they're an old lineage, they must have been on all the islands. So what happened to them on the other islands as the sea level rose and then they became 4 different islands? What happened to them? So Anacapa is not the right habitat and it's tiny. So you could imagine that didn't support whatever jays were stranded there over years. It also probably would have taken years and years and years and years and years, right, for the stranding. Sea level rise does not happen that quickly. And so, but over time, people started getting interested in saying, well, were they on Santa Rosa? Because this bird it's a tiny population. At the time when I was working on them, the best estimate that had been published was 12,000 birds. Since then, they think it's 3,000, and they don't think it's been a huge like drop in population. They think that the methods for the 12,000 was wrong. So 3,000 is what the estimate is now that most people agree with. And so there's only a few birds, and that's the only place that they're found. So a lot of people around like the middle 2010, around that time when I published this paper, we're starting to talk about, we have a lot of evidence that shows that they were on Santa Rosa at some point. Maybe we should translocate some. Let's put them on Santa Rosa. This is a hugely controversial, I think it's still controversial to this day. I know it is actually. So it's a big controversy to say like, we're not gonna take this giant predator that's on Santa Cruz and we're gonna put it on Santa Rosa. And there's a lot of little birds and stuff that are just gonna get, really hammered by this big predator. So I understand that. The other thing is Santa Rosa is 100% owned by the National Park Service. The National Park Service is tending to be fairly conservative about things, the government. Nature Conservancy is like, come on, let's do it. And so there's some like controversy there. But everybody wants to do the right thing for the jays. So everybody believes that island scrub jays used to be on all 4 islands at some point as this big island. As the sea levels rose, they must have stayed. Santa Rosa has perfect habitat or had perfect habitat for them to support a population. So they think, okay, they were probably on there, but for how long? So when did they disappear from the islands? So there's a controversy on when they disappeared from Santa Rosa, because they did find a fossil bone in the fossil, so it's not actually been transferred by people. So they say, okay, yes, island scrub jays were on Santa Rosa Island right next door. So they know, but then there's a controversy because there's also some cultural records from ranchers and naturalists who had described that, even like 150 years ago, when the ranchers were talking to the naturalists, they were like, yeah, there's jays around here. They're here, right here. And that was it. So there was no documentation of that, but there were this sort of talk that the jays survived on Santa Rosa until like 120, 150 years ago. So then that would make a much more compelling argument to say, okay, let's put some there. They were just there. They went extinct on that island, so let's put them there. Anyway, just outlining the controversy. I'm not going to say my opinion. So when the species was split in 2016, it was a surprise to me. They didn't reference my paper, so they referenced a couple of other people since my paper when they used other markers and sort of more sequences and stuff, and they got similar results. They actually even got older lineages for island scrub-jays. So they marked them as sort of even older than my markers did. So that's all corroborated. So we really do believe that they were this long lineage. And the other cool thing that's going to happen in the future is that my samples and the other samples that I got from the museum, all from the Western Scrub-Jay complex, those are all going to be used in this project, this California Conservation Genomics project. I encourage you all to look up this project, and it's coming out of UCLA. It started out of UCLA, but there's over 100 scientists now that are collecting samples, and they're doing genomic sequencing, these whole genome sequencing and other kinds of sequencing to have this huge genomic data set for like everything in California, lots of things, not just birds and not just vertebrates. It's a lot of different things, and they are looking for ways to sort of determine genetic diversity and other things that land managers and other people can use to sort of protect biodiversity in the future. So I'm kind of excited that the samples will be used again. So I can talk all the time about that. Okay, almost done here. The last thing, or one of the last things is, so I also started doing the sort of behavioral stuff, and I measured territory size and things, and I went out and I measured, I did DNA, microsatellite DNA analysis of paternity for these birds, because they are like, there's no cooperative breeding. That was one of the weird things, is that they're this tiny population, but cooperative breeding never evolved in island scrub-jays, which is really interesting on its own. But the pairs, they get together and they hold these territories, they hold them year round. They're, breeding and feeding, foraging territories all year round, and they kind of mate, and they're monogamous for life. They don't really ever divorce. And so are they monogamous? So that's one of the things that I wanted to do. So I went out and I found a bunch of nests, and then I would catch them, and I would measure the fledglings and all this stuff. And so I looked at reproductive success and territory size and feather color and things like that. So just quickly, one result is that smaller territories had more fledglings. So there was more success for island scrub-jays that had smaller territories, which is a little bit weird. But when I looked at the territories of the smaller territories, it was these birds that were really had the most oaks and the most scrub habitat, and so it's the best habitat. And the bigger territories had a bunch of grass and just open grass. And at the time when I was working there were pigs on the island still, and so it was just not as good. So it was like the small territory was fine as long as it had the great resources, and they could just like fledge and have this great success for more fledglings. And so that was a kind of a neat result. And then I did show that there's a little cheating going on. So some of the offspring were not the father's offspring at the nest, a very, very low amount. And there's another study that came after mine. Another grad student did a similar study, and he found the same thing. It's about 8 to 10% of the offspring are extra pair. Sometimes it's because a mate will die and you won't notice, and then she'll have a new mate, and then it's still the father. The father is like her new mate. So that's not really super cheating, if you want to think of it that way. Not cheating, but you know what I mean, like this extra pair thing. So really there seems to be a lot of fidelity between the pairs. And this is very similar to like Florida scrub-jays. I also did this with California scrub-jays. I was studying them, and I had very small sample size, but they were like 50% extra pair offspring. So they are not as monogamous as the island scrub-jays, which is sort of interesting. Someone needs to sort of redo that. Another thing that came out in 2015, a paper came out about this bill evolution, which is super, super interesting. If you don't know about it already, I encourage you to look at this paper. But Katy Delaney was the grad student, and she was working on island scrub-jays out there way after me. I didn't know her, but she found that the bills of the scrub-jays that were using oaks or living in oaks was different than the ones that were living in pine. So there's a very small sort of pine forest area where there are jays, and they maintain territories, and their bills are different. and the habitat is right up butt next to butt up right next to each other. And there's still, so there must be some dispersal and things, but whatever's happening, it looks like she was calling it ecological speciation. So they're not separate species yet, but there's this difference in morphology, which is really, really interesting, with the specialists that are oak or pine. And so this is very like Galapagos Island stuff, like Peter and Rosemary Grant, who've been studying Darwin's finches on the Galapagos forever, and or who had been studying them forever and had found some ecological speciation, within the island based on specialization. So anyway, it's very interesting stuff. And so the last thing is just that there are management issues, and I've kind of touched on a couple. So tiny population size, the restricted range means you want to have another population over on Rosa. And then the thing that a lot of people are really concerned about is West Nile virus getting there, which they have a vaccination program, but it's very expensive, and the scrub jays are onto them and they don't want to get their boosters, and so they don't get caught. So it's very expensive, and the jays are sort of onto them. So they're not sure how that's going to work. So warming climate could bring those mosquitoes and West Nile virus, and so there's management implications for that. I believe that's it. Yeah. So there's my red-legged frog. That's not a bird, but you guys have to look at it for a second. So I really thank you very much for listening to me ramble on and on about my projects. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. We really, really appreciate it. And
Thank you.
we're starting to get many questions in here. I just want to remind everyone, please, if you have a question for Katy, please pop it into our Q&A down below in your down below, and that helps us keep track of it, and we appreciate that.
Yeah.
And
So
go ahead, Mark.
So Lance asks, how did the big fires in 2018 affect bird numbers in subsequent years? Sounds like the survey started before the fires in the fall of 2018.
Yeah, so that was the Woolsey fire in the fall of 2018. So there were 2 counts before that. Yeah, we haven't really done like a full analysis since then, but we think that but we do know that there was an effect, like the areas were burned, and a lot of the areas were burned. So yeah, there definitely are effects from that, but yeah, we haven't really done a lot of the analysis for that yet. And then by the time the spring counts came along in 2019, there was some vegetation growth, and there were birds and animals kind of coming back to the areas, but clearly there would be an effect. And so that's something that we can look at because we had a couple of years of data before. But yeah, that's a great question. We haven't really done a lot of analysis based on that.
Great, thank you. Melanie asks, how do we volunteer if we want to be part of the counts?
I'm so glad you asked that. So please contact me. My information is there on the screen. If you happen to know Linnea Hall at the Western Foundation of Museum of Western Foundation of Vertebrate Zoology, if you happen to know her, you could contact her directly, but I will put you in touch with her. But so yeah, just contact me. It's really cool. I'm going to sell it again because it's literally like 2 mornings. If you really grab like one set of points, and it's cool because you go out there, it's really early, you show up at, I don't even know, 5:30. I go hike to my far point, and then it's kind of dark and you can hear the coyotes, and I start counting, and then you're done by 9 o'clock or 9:30 or whatever, or 9, you're supposed to be done 4 hours after the sunrise, so that's a time. And then you wait a couple weeks and you do it again, and it's great. It's really great, and you're really contributing a huge amount to our project.
Yeah, unfortunately, Linnea was actually on our call, and she has
was she?
now dropped out. I don't see her on the.
She's a very, very busy woman. So
Yeah, she probably just wanted to tune in for the highlights and then.
I know, maybe so.
Yeah.
We'll talk about it. She's very generous with her information for me for this talk too.
Great.
Great. And we have your information here that's still up on the screen for everybody. So
Yes, and email is the better way, just because my phone I don't check as much, but email is a good way.
wonderful. Thanks. Brianna asks, do you think higher rate of monogamy in island scrub-jays is due to lower population numbers and limited range?
That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, it makes sense to, if you're going, they're not a super flashy bird. So a lot of these high rates of extra pair paternity that at least, when people were studying it a long time ago, it was a lot of these very flashy, the males are very different in plumage and behavior and song, and it's only the males that sing and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of differences between the sexes, and the female would want to choose that male that is like the hot, sexy guy in that season. And so I think that the monogamy also has to do with this long term that they are, so they don't really divorce. I mean, somebody has to die for them to get or I guess disperse, but they don't really do that. There's nowhere really to disperse to. So that kind of gets at your question here about limited range. So yeah, I really think it's this like long-term bond that they have as well. And yeah, their population is really small, but I would still suspect that if you had there are probably some species on the island that you could do a study like this, that you still would find comparable extra pair paternity to like the mainland, depending on these species that, pick a mate that spring, that kind of thing. They not really have a history and a bond that they're defending a territory all year long, and they're just sort of like hopping on that spring. And there's other mating systems where the male will have multiple females, and so she doesn't, there's not really, so that kind of sets up also that male's busy a lot and so she can kind of go wandering for the nearby territories to find maybe a male that can increase her chances of having successful, sexy offspring.
Sure.
Okay, great. Richard asked a question. The jay populations using the pine tree that has a bill difference with the ones using the oaks, are those feeding on the pine cone seeds?
Yes. Yep. That's what they're doing. They're using they're more like they're narrower to be able to get into the pine cones. Yep. That's exactly what they're doing.
Darwin's finches all over again.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's so cool.
Yeah, see if another 10,000 years from now if their bills are crossed.
Well, hopefully those trees survive.
So Lance asks, one of the figures on the bird surveys plotted the number of species at each survey area in the first year and also summed over all years. What about the number of individual birds and not just species?
Yes, that's a great question. So I didn't have access to all the whole data set. I have the summarized data that I based that graph on. That's an excellent question. I want to do that where I look at, well, and the other thing is, I mean, that's the species richness. That's like naive species richness. So it's just number of species. And so what you can do is you can really look at biodiversity and species richness based on the abundance of each species as well, because species richness is going to go up even if you have just one bird. But if you have like, so species richness where you look at like an index that takes into account abundance is also an actual better way to measure species richness or biodiversity, avian biodiversity of an area. So I want to do that too. Yeah, that's excellent. It's a really great point because, something like mourning doves, mourning doves are, in my counts, at least where I am counting, are extremely abundant. And then this year I haven't seen as many. So it's like, okay, we need to look at individuals also. And so that is part of the data set. And we are also, like I mentioned, we're getting density estimates because we're measuring distance between the birds and us. And so we can get that measure for some of the real more common species where we find a lot of them. So yeah, that's just coming in the future. Yeah, we just have this data that we're piling up that we need to sort of analyze more. But yeah, that's a great question. I want to do that.
Great.
Great.
Ken asks, okay, there's going to be some controversy maybe.
Cool.
This is about exporting to Santa Rosa Island.
Mhm.
Yeah, so if the jay went extinct on Santa Rosa, isn't it risky to subtract from the small population on Santa Cruz to repopulate the extinction-prone Santa Rosa?
Yeah, sure. I mean, these are the things that the people that are doing. So for example, I know it's not a bird, but my red-legged frog project, I'm doing exactly that, where I'm taking egg masses of red-legged frogs, and I'm taking them out of a stable source population. I'm taking them out and I'm putting them in another place. So am I hurting that source population? That's the thing that you really have to be really mindful of. And so I don't know. I'm assuming that the people that are thinking about this and that really want to do it have protocols and procedures in place that they want to do. And I would suspect that what they're doing is probably like head starting birds, nesting in zoos or something like that, like maybe collecting half the eggs from a clutch or something. I think that they would be trying to have very minimal impact on the sensitive population that exists and has existed for hundreds of thousands of years. So yeah, so it could be risky. That's kind of a wishy-washy question. It could be, but believe me, as biologists, conservation biologists who are desperate to save species, you're considering all of that. You would never want to, you're considering all of that, all of the risks. Yeah.
Okay. Another Santa Rosa question. Brianna asks, when talking about transporting jays to Santa Rosa, are there natural predators of the jay on Santa Rosa?
Yeah, so it's the same as Santa Cruz Island, I think. And maybe one of you all would know if there are Cooper's Hawk. I would assume there's Cooper's Hawks on Santa Rosa. Cooper's Hawks on Cruz will try to get scrub jays. I have never seen them be successful. A big male island scrub jay is almost as big as a small Cooper's Hawk. So they're pretty big, they're pretty comparable in size, but Cooper's Hawks will get the nests and probably dumb fledglings. And so that's the natural predator. The foxes will definitely eat the nests, nestlings and eggs. And so foxes can climb trees. Oftentimes the island scrub jays, the scrub oaks are sort of low and they spread out, and that's where their nest is. And so foxes can easily get up there. So that's a predator as well that lives there. And then other jays are predators on each other's nests. So adults, not so much. Adults they're pretty big and smart, but a lot of the young ones and the nests definitely have similar predators as on Cruz.
Did you actually state why they went extinct on Santa Rosa?
No, because nobody knows. So it kind of depends. So if they went extinct like 120 years ago, let's say, from a rancher, it was all ranch land. The rancher said, yeah, there's jays here. And then it was just like, that's it. So it was a ranch, and that's bad habitat for jays, and there's only a couple of canyons on Santa Rosa right now. As I understand it, I've never been there because there's no jays there. But as I understand it, there's only a couple of canyons that would even support scrub jays right now, and so they're trying to recover the island, and they think that actually scrub jays might help recover the island by planting oaks.
Right.
So I think it was probably like a habitat thing. There's also so that would have been if that's recent, but a long time ago. So if it was, let's say it was 10,000 years ago, the island, or 9,000 years ago, the islands were sort of separating and you started getting crappy habitat. There were also like there were elephants out there. They were like trampling all over the place. Santa Cruz is a big island, so it's like the more diverse. There's lots of places for scrub jays to probably have a refugia from these giant, mammoths or probably,
Right.
stomping on everything. So I think it's probably just habitat either way. I love the elephant story, just like I'm spreading it around as truth because it's just like such a cool thing, but I have no idea. There's no way, there's no reason to think that that was true or not. So yeah, but I like that idea. But I think it's habitat, I'm sure. There's not a lot of other things out there. It's not like the Santa Monica Mountains where we have a lot of other
All right.
stressors on our birds and other animals.
Right. Right.
Lance has another question about Santa Monica mountain surveys. One slide listed 20 special status species that have been recorded. Among them were long-eared owl and yellow-billed cuckoo, which are really unusual. Can you please say more about how those species were detected? I ask in part because there's a lot of confusion between long-eared owl calls and some calls of great horned owls. And yellow-billed cuckoo would be really rare.
Yes. So I'm sorry, Lance. I actually don't know about the yellow-billed cuckoo and how that was recorded. It was real. Linnea said it was real, or she trusted the person. I could go back and look at that for you if you want to contact me. But the long-eared owl actually showed up, and it was seen. We have photos and stuff of it, like it was there at one of our sites. And it was I can't remember what it was doing. Was it breeding? Somebody say it was breeding. I just can't remember the details about it right now, but we actually got eyes on it and got photos as well. So yeah, that was weird, but yeah. And it was the only time, it was one time that it was detected. Although we have seen I also have seen and got a photograph of a long-eared owl nearby one of our point count stations, but it was also not in the spring. Can't remember when it was, but.
And yeah. Linnea just put in the chat that
oh, good.
Yellow-billed cuckoo was a legit detection, and the bird was seen, and you can email her as well as you to
Great.
Get more information.
Yes, email Linnea about that because yeah, it was.
And and also the long-eared owl was breeding.
Right.
Oh yeah. Okay, that's cool. What I thought. That's what I thought was happening.
Was the cuckoo a migrant or because they migrate really late?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe Linnea can tell.
Cuckoo was a migrant.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Linnea.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Linnea.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. And you're gonna like this. Here's a non-bird question. Naresh asks, where can you learn more about red-legged frogs?
Oh my gosh.
NFF, what can I say?
I can't believe you asked that. No, yeah. There's on the Santa Monica Mountain, the nps.gov/SAMO website. It's actually right on the front cover there, front page there, where there's a link to more information. And actually, even if you just Google it, and if it's Santa Monica Mountains, California red-legged frogs, there's a bunch of news articles that will come up, and like podcasts and things.
And
Wonderful. Lance has a question. What about using autonomous recording units in the monitoring? Are you doing that?
Yeah, that's cool. We so as a part of a different project around Liberty Canyon, their Liberty Canyon Bridge, we talked about, because point counts aren't maybe necessarily the best way to monitor like the new Liberty Canyon Bridge, right? We might want to do point counts and some other things. And so we had talked about cameras, and we had talked about these recording units as well for that. Yeah, I just think it's the standardized protocol for doing the point counts is comparable to other point count data that's collected around the country and around the world, and in some of our other national parks. And so that makes sense to monitor birds that way. There are these recording units are great, like I said, so for like a specific monitoring project. And maybe that is something that, we just replace. I mean, I've heard of all these, there's all these new things that people are using to follow birds around and to record them and see where they're going. And so it may actually be the way of the future, but we're not using them now. Yeah.
And I have a question. That picture, is that a bullfrog or a red-legged frog?
That's a red-legged frog.
Oh, okay. It's
Yeah,
really big.
they're really big. It's the largest native amphibian in the West.
Wow.
Yeah, it's the California state amphibian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, this is this is actually a reintroduced one. So this one is, started as an egg that I put in into a translocation stream in the Santa Monicas, and it grew up and a tadpole and a subadult and survived, and now it's a breeder in our reintroduction site. So
Does it
big.
Does it make it sound like a bullfrog? In other words, would we confuse it? No,
not at all.
Confuse it. Okay.
No, it doesn't make it sound like a bullfrog, and there's really not that many places around that you hear it, what it does make anyway. And it's very soft. It's a very soft call. So if you hear loud frogs, it's never one of these. I get a lot of comments say, I have these in my yard. I hear them every night. And I'm like,
maybe
not. Probably not, but you probably have another cool native species. So
Katy, thank you very, very much for a wonderful webinar.
Thank you all.
You generate lots of questions, and I think hopefully you're going to get some volunteers out of this.
It would be great. Linnea and I would definitely appreciate it. And thank you, Kimball, for asking me to do this. And thank you all for having me. And I hope to hear from you.
Thank you very much. It was very informative. Thanks.
Thank you again. Join us next week, the 20th, for our program with Marky Muchler and our membership meeting next week. I thought I heard Susan. Okay.
Hey, everybody, please vote.
Yes. And until then, we'll see you all next week. Thank you all very much. And thank you again, Katy. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Katy.
That was great.
Bye-bye now. Good night.
Thank you all. Bye. Good night.
Good night.